Mali has an unelected transition government following a 2020 military coup d'état that upended a constitutional democratic system. The country last held presidential elections in 2018, re-electing the late Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta in elections international observers considered minimally credible despite some irregularities. Following the 2020 coup, a brief period of military rule was followed by a civilian-led transition government. In May 2021, the transition government was overthrown by the military. In June 2021, Assimi Goïta, one of the 2020 coup leaders and the former transition vice president, was sworn in as transition president. Repeatedly delayed parliamentary elections were held in 2020, followed by manipulation of results by the Constitutional Court in a process observers regarded as flawed and undemocratic. Former President Keïta dissolved parliament later in 2020, and it was replaced by an unelected National Transition Council. The National Police has responsibility for law enforcement and maintenance of order in urban areas and supports the armed forces in internal military operations. The National Gendarmerie has responsibility in rural areas, including a specialized border security unit. The National Guard and the Malian Armed Forces occasionally perform law enforcement duties in areas where police and gendarmes were absent. The National Police reports to the Ministry of Security and Civil Protection and the Ministry of Defense. The Malian Armed Forces, the National Gendarmerie, and the National Guard fall administratively under the Ministry of Defense. Operational control of the National Guard and National Gendarmerie is shared between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Security and Civil Protection. The country's intelligence service has authority to investigate any case and temporarily detain persons at the discretion of its Director General, who reports directly to the President. Civilian authorities did not always maintain effective control over civilian and military security forces. There were reports members of the security forces committed numerous abuses. Significant human rights issues included credible reports of unlawful or arbitrary killings, including extrajudicial killings, forced disappearance, torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment by government forces, harsh and life-threatening prison conditions, arbitrary arrest or detention, political prisoners or detainees, serious problems with the independence of the judiciary, arbitrary or unlawful interference with privacy, serious abuses in a conflict, including unlawful and widespread civilian deaths or harm, and unlawful recruitment and use of child soldiers by non-state armed groups allied with the government, serious restrictions on free expression and media, including violence or threats of violence against journalists, unjustified arrests of journalists, censorship, and enforcement of criminal libel and slander laws, inability of citizens to change their government peacefully through free and fair elections, serious government corruption, lack of investigation of and accountability for gender-based violence, including domestic and intimate partner violence, sexual violence, child, early, and forced marriage, female genital mutilation, cutting, and other forms of such violence, crimes involving violence or threats of violence targeting members of national and ethnic groups, trafficking in persons, vaguely worded laws criminalizing consensual same-sex sexual conduct between adults, although not enforced, and existence of the worst forms of child labor. With occasional notable exceptions, the transition government made little effort to investigate, prosecute, or punish government officials who committed abuses, whether in the security forces or elsewhere in the transition government. The transition government made some efforts to address corruption. Impunity for serious crimes committed in the country's northern and central regions continued with few exceptions, in view of the transition government's lack of control of 80% of the national territory. The transition government rarely investigated cases related to killings, forced disappearances, or other serious human rights abuses, and those it did rarely moved beyond an investigative phase. Non-state armed groups, including several signatories to the 2015 Algiers Accord for Peace and Reconciliation in Mali, Algiers Accord, committed serious human rights abuses, including summary executions, torture, and the unlawful recruitment and use of child soldiers. Wagner Group forces, often operating in close coordination with the Malian armed forces, allegedly committed unlawful killings, rapes, and other abuses. Terrorist groups kidnapped and killed civilians, including humanitarian workers. Ethnic militias, formed to defend one ethnic group from other ethnic groups or other armed groups, committed serious human rights abuses, including summary executions, and destroyed homes and food stores. Government investigations and prosecutions were rare because civilian and military officials lacked the political will to investigate, and most abuses occurred in areas the transition government did not control.